Welcome to the live webinar on digital leadership today, presented by Skillsoft. We live in an era of tremendous and dynamic technological innovations. Though technology and digital transformation creates tremendous opportunities, it requires a contemporary leader who's agile, innovative, and resilient. In today's webinar, we aim to explore the importance of leadership development in the modern digital world. With great pleasure, I introduce you to our speaker for today, Benny Ramos. Benny is currently the solution expert for business and leadership at Skillsoft. Prior to this, he was leading a customer success team focused on aiding clients on learning program and strategy, marketing, and measurement. With over 18 years of experience, Benny collaborates with organizations to help them understand how to utilize learning technology to drive performance. As an advocate for leadership and the modern learner, he is passionate about improving all aspects of the employee lifecycle and has been featured in various publications and a featured speaker of online learning measurement at events throughout Canada and the US and APAC. Welcome, Benny. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to today's session. Again, the session is all about digital leadership today. We know that there are many drivers for change, and when we think about this, there's going to be reasons we want to have development at scale and democratization of development for leadership. So I'll talk about that over the next 14 minutes. So hopefully this will be entertaining for you. The changing nature of leadership, I'm coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Leadership can be defined in many different ways, and I'll have to say that it's not geography that determines leadership. It's more the time, it's more the technology, and it's more the challenges that are currently happening today. And the changing nature of leadership, it's very exciting for many people who are getting into leadership, people who have been leaders and are currently practicing. The example that I'm going to be using, or examples I'll be using, hopefully this will spark some thought within the audience today. So when we look at this, the changing nature of leadership, in the past, the siloed leadership that we talked about, when you had a team that you had for many years, many months, and you were developing that team over long time frame, and perhaps you were geographically in the same location. Whether that was the same a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, we know that the challenges today of COVID with the pandemic have made the idea of co-locating with your team very, very difficult. It's made for the idea of a distributed team, perhaps geographically, perhaps over time zones. And really the idea of this didn't just happen overnight, 3 months, 6 months, 8 months. We were actually looking at this in terms of developing the idea of mission-driven teams and being co-located in one instance, and then the next time being more international, being more geographically dispersed, being dispersed by time. It's been happening over the last few years, and we know that technology has been aiding this. Digital transformation has been here, and the idea that distributed decision-making is something that's going to be aiding organizations is going to be very popular. A person by the name of Mitch Joel wrote a book called 6 Pixels of Separation. And if we think of a couple things just historically over the last few years, in 2017, we might have thought, he talked about this idea of impressions. And then impression could be an email. It could be a notification from an app. It could be a text. It could be a phone call. And these are the types of things that leaders would have to deal with every day. And around 2017, there were about 70 impressions on a leader at any given time. Today, the number of impressions that are happening with a leader are anywhere from 100 to 110. So there's 100 to 110 decisions that have to be happening each and every day. If you can distribute and empower employees and have leadership development happening so that there's empowerment, you're going to be more agile, you're going to be more responsive to customers, and that's one thing that we want to look at. Additionally, if we look forward in terms of the changing nature of leadership, we know that unfortunately with COVID, that people who are perhaps more senior, more elder, are more perhaps apt to get impacted by something like COVID. But generally speaking, I'm going to make the case, or I will say that business continuity and leadership development are one and the same. At any point in time, a leader may become unavailable because they move on, they leave the organization, or unfortunately, they're sick, they're ill. And we know that that is perhaps happening, and we have to plan for that. And in fact, someone like the Aberdeen Group would say that perhaps 1 out of every 3 postings or leadership positions can only be filled internally, and it's much more difficult for that to be filled today because perhaps if we think of travel and those types of restrictions, people aren't able to come from outside of your geographic region to perhaps move into these leadership positions and be hired. So that's something to think about. Lastly, when we think about leadership development and digital transformation as we go forward, the impact here, you'll notice it talks about this, cultural dexterity and the changing nature. This is from Mitch. Sorry, this is actually from Harold Yarkey from Internet Timelines. He's worked with folks like, I guess, when you think of organizations, I should say, they've worked with many organizations trying to change and look at the nature of work. And we're looking at the idea here that we used to be, individuals, and then we worked perhaps in networks, and the networks that we're talking about were perhaps in the same place, perhaps in the same buildings, but we've gone from, hierarchies to hierarchies, and the hierarchy is the idea that we're not only as leaders responsible for people to people, but because of technology, we know that digital transformation with AI, machine learning, robotics, blockchain, and so on, the idea is that as leaders, we are not only responsible for people to people, but people and machines to machines. So today, leadership and technology cannot be taken apart. It's not something that we can have separated. So there has to be some sort of appreciation of technology. We know that many organizations over the last couple of decades, in fact, when there was technology involved, there may have been perhaps successes, not only because of the technology onto its own, but to unleash and really leverage those technology, you have to have development, you have to have leadership, you have to have different innovative mindsets. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, coming back to the case of developing leaders, poor leadership behaviors can take hold very early. And we know we want to develop this leadership pipeline, especially when you think of McKinsey has actually indicated that in the next couple years, leaders from the age of 55 to 74 are going to grow by about 4.6%, and 74 and above are going to grow by 2.6%. So you have an aging population that we need to backfill. And when we think of leadership and how people have become leaders, it is simply not enough to be the best at one thing and become the leader. So in the past, you might have been a leader because you were the best in the assembly line. Because in the future, what you would be able to do based on your skill set, you could observe other people doing exactly what you've done. Today, the teams are so intermingled, and the skill sets that you might have on your team are going to be very wide and varying, that you might have people from marketing, you might have people from HR, you might have people from all sorts of different functions that you're leading. So it has to be more than just what you've been good at. And up to 50% of new leaders fail on the job. And what that is, how we measure that is in actual real dollars. And this is from John Spence. So if we go back to a Brandon Hall white paper that was done perhaps around 2017, that was co-written and underwritten by Skillsoft, here's some numbers that might be interesting to you. 35% of all training budgets are actually allocated to leadership development. It's probably the largest amount of spend that organizations will use, perhaps equal to compliance. But what's interesting is only about 15% of the people that take the leadership training actually like it. So you're spending a third of your budget on leadership development, but only 15% actually like it. And how much is that? Give you an idea. Jeffrey Pfeffer from McKinsey, who's from Stanford University, indicated that organizations are spending anywhere in the magnitude of $24 to $25 billion in leadership development. And again, that large spend is perhaps not being appreciated by those who are the learners. But the next aspect to that is 32% of churn in terms of what senior leaders have indicated, around 400 senior leaders, indicated that could be bettered by better leadership development. And lastly, 9. 9 is significant because only 9% of people who are leaders today have really indicated they actually stepped up and volunteered to be the leader. What was the other 91%? You were the most senior person on the team, so you became the leader. You were the best salesperson or the best person in operations, so you became the leader. And really what that talks to is that by the time you have your first leadership position, you're not prepared mentally, and you're not prepared from a skill perspective. So again, this is something that needs to be remedied. Now, what are the types of things that people had indicated that they were dissatisfied? That, 85% of people that were dissatisfied, they said that leadership was perhaps too expensive to leadership development, perhaps too hard to access, perhaps too small a group was allowed into that. Perhaps it was not timely. It was something that was happening once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year. And when I actually needed to know that information, it wasn't at my fingertips. So again, this is something that can be remedied, and we'll talk about how that could be. I want to say at this part that I am from Skillsoft, and a lot of the things I'm talking about are technology agnostic, but I'm quite prejudiced in saying that Skillsoft is a good partner to do this with. So, the cost of poor leadership is significant. And how significant? Perhaps 8% of annual revenues, 50% of leaders fail, we already know that. And then the talent turnover is very large. And it really feeds into this idea of engagement. A person by the name of Kevin Cruz wrote an article, was published in Inc. magazine. It's actually a super article. There was many articles or many pieces towards it. And he talked about the idea that engagement is, again, driven by leadership, and being able to be affected by leadership is something that over time can really affect, again, productivity in organization, can affect retention in organization, and the organizations like Aon Hewitt actually measure organization. What they've indicated is that if you look at organizations who are highly engaged, they're 10 to 12% more productive. They have 3% or so less absenteeism than those who are not engaged. And what's interesting is they have something called a salary elasticity, about 14%, which means if I was offered the same job across the street with a competitor, it would take up to 14% more salary for me to move if I'm currently engaged. And what were those engagement drivers? Hewitt would say in 2017, 2016, they would say that number 1 was work-life balance. This was at that time. And number 2 was learning and development and career development. Aberdeen Group at the same time, 2017, 2018, had indicated number 1 was performance management. My leader telling me where I was or at what point I am in terms of the performance that I'm doing today. So giving that feedback. And number 2 was career development and learning development. So learning development, if we're all in the line together, if there's an interest in learning development and leadership development, we have a very, very powerful role to play within the engagement of our organization. So what are the current challenges, and what do we know? Now, today, 2020, it's been a very, very challenging year, but a number of years ago, this is from Arizona State University, they talked about what the 2020 work skills would be. And many organizations, even up until 2019, were thinking about what are these things that I'm going to invest in the future. And these are things like computational world, the rise of smart machines, a new media ecology, and globally connected world. This is just another way of what the ESB Business School in Austria would have said is digital transformation, where we have robotics, where we think about big data, when we think about all these different types of things, even the new media ecology. Everyone should be able to do something like create a video, write for the web, because writing for the web is very different, or even something like search engine optimization, because this is how people find information. And people, again, up until 2019, were saying we're going to develop these work skills through 2020, 2021, 2022, and guess what? The future is now. This is a film that was put out in 1955. Wilson Gibson, from RKO, just talked about the future is now. We can't wait. And over the last year, we saw this extreme, sort of acceleration investment in technologies, and these technologies changed the perception of what work was like, and also changed the impact on what leaders needed to be like. And in fact, when we think of over the last couple years, the World Economic Forum has talked about how work is changing. And if you think of the roles that we'll be doing in 2030, the US Department of Labor here in North America had indicated that about 57% of all jobs that we'll be doing in 2030 have not yet even been created yet. And in fact, the World Economic Forum themselves upped that and said it's actually over 60%. So 60% of the roles. And we can harken back to the fact that today, one of the most popular roles or popular jobs and highest paying jobs out of the gate for individuals is a data scientist, but that title didn't even exist a few years ago. And in fact, the CLO from TD Bank would say at ATDTK that happened a year and a half ago, that the average number of careers a person might be having in their lifetime is up to 27. So it's not about just these skill sets, it's around mindsets, because we are going to have many more careers, not only because the careers are shortening, but because we're living longer. And that's a different story altogether. But now what happened? Beginning this year, 2020, we know that we have extraordinary times. The coronavirus pandemic has really changed how work is happening. And in fact, the whole idea of a digital transformation, the focus was on efficiency and economics, and it really changed the complexion because this technology now, the focus was on safety, was on the customer engagement, because it had to be different, and the worker engagement. And in fact, Accenture has indicated that in the last 3 months, we have spent more in terms of digital transformation in the last 3 years. And it's, in terms of the opportunity here, there is an opportunity, but it really is something that individuals themselves are going to be challenged with. And again, coming back to the idea that we have perhaps this idea of retaining the people and the talent that we have and the skills that we have, and how do we do this? We think of these strategies for relevance, and again, this is just harkening back to this idea of change. Automation is here, but automation is not the be all and end all. When we talk about, again, digital transformation, Jerry Kane from Carroll School of Business, he's written for Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Management Review as well. He talks about the idea again that the digital transformation that we're undergoing, and it's not just remote work. Remote work is a big part of it today, and we've had to spend money training people and putting in systems and so on. It is about the will and the skill combined. It's not just about investing in technology. Anyone can invest in technology, but to actually, again, leverage that technology, we need to have something different. And there are many implications. And again, this is from the World Economic Forum, but Skillsoft ourselves, 1 in 6 people is going to be heavily affected by technology and by automation. And again, the type of skill sets that are going to be required in the future is not just about the workforce, it's about the skills force, and it's about leadership and development that we have to think about. Now, we did a study with Vance and Bourne, and this was in throughout Asia, and we looked at the idea that about I apologize, there's about 750 individuals, and we were finding that 9 out of 10 individuals were very, very concerned about their future employability, and they were concerned that their employers were not doing enough to ensure that they were going to be employable. And through this time and through this crisis, these are what some of the thought leaders are talking about. This is actually Harvard Business Review. They talked about the 4 behaviors that help leaders manage the crisis. They emphasized communication and rapid decision-making and adaptability. And that decision-making is really based on data and how do we deal with that data. And over here, emphasis on communication, actionable intelligence, and adaptability. So in thinking of agile, and this is from the Wall Street Journal, again, this is just over the last month and a half or so. Also from Gartner, The emphasis on storytelling and communication, prioritization, and innovation. These are the types of things that people are concerned about today. And again, the more people that we have in our organization that are able to deal with this, not only going to be able to develop themselves as leaders, leading yourself, then leading your team, and then leading a strategy and leading the organization are going to be very important. Now, what can modern leadership development look like? Let's look at this, for a moment. Now, I want to, again, indicate that from a Skillsoft perspective, we've have a number of accolades, and I'm going to say that it perhaps isn't something that we don't need to necessarily say we're good. There are other organizations that are saying that there's some value in what we've done. So I'm going to ask you to take perhaps the snippets of what we are doing well, and perhaps you can embrace those and put that into your programs, and consider these things. Amalgam Insights is actually one of the things I wanted to point out here. They'd actually done a very good review of our program since it initiated and started in 2018. They're very critical at the beginning, but they looked at the approach and found that our approach was something that was palatable for them. And one of the reasons that it comes back to these truths of modern leadership. We wanted to ensure that the program that we were doing and the program that we had created really catered to modern mindsets. So this is something that we really focus on, the idea that the reach in the organization, it has to be democratized. We think of leadership development in many areas and many regions has really been only catering to a few, and really event-based. When it happens perhaps in person, and it happens very infrequently, once a year, once every quarter. Those types of events, it's going to be difficult in terms of scalability, in terms of consistency, and in terms of reach. And I will just put this out. Elliot Macy in 2013, at eLearn 2013, yes, he had asked the audience a kind of a loaded question. He'd said, what percentage of modern work is at or near an internet connected device? And around 2013, it was about 83%. Today, it's about 87%. The loaded question again is, what percentage of modern work is at or near the classroom? So coming back to, if you wanted, again, a scalable, cost-effective, consistent experience for your learners, especially from a leadership perspective, leveraging technology is something you might want to look at. Second is creating and empowering a team, a very critical task. Jeff and Legel have actually talked about the idea that, in terms of leaders, and someone like Steve Jobs has said in the past, he's famous for saying, I don't hire smart people to tell them what to do, they help tell me what to do. So if you use, Jeff and Legel actually used the comparison of a composer or a symphony conductor. The conductor doesn't tell the horn section or the string section how to play their instruments. He makes sure that they're coordinated and on the same page. He makes sure that in terms of the team, that they're the right team. And the HR summit that happened in Atlanta, there's a number of guests there, and they talked about the idea that you could put together the same people who are very high performers, put them on the same team, and for some reason they don't perform well. Again, the job of, or the role of the leader is ensuring that there's that empowerment and making sure the composition of the team is right. Connecting and collaborating, again, it's different than command and control. Let's put it that way. And General Stan McChrystal from the U.S. he's actually come to the point where he's indicated, and there's many like him. I just used him as an example because you'd think that in the Army, then in the military, that command and control is very important. But he is such a proponent after retiring from the military of connecting and collaborating. Agile teams and squads, again, mission-based teams, temporal teams. There may be a point in time where you are not necessarily a leader with authority, but a leader without authority because you're a project manager. Anytime you can help a person do more, dream more, or learn more, or become more, you're actually a leader. So ensuring that a person, you can guide somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean formal leadership at some point in time. Mindsets. skill sets versus mindsets. So, when you think of the skill sets, competencies, and mindsets that we have tried to assemble our programs around, originally we had Wharton work with us on this, and then we decided to work with a partner, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the mindsets are quite important. There's many traditional programs out there, and I'm not going to say that Korn Ferry, for example, is bad. It's just Korn Ferry, for example, those competencies were developed in the 80s and 90s, and they do focus on very, very useful things, such as communication and decreasing errors. Errors are never good, but if that's it, that's not going to be enough in today's world. And there are some great examples of this, of course, over history around, great communication and reducing errors. Six Sigma is great, but if you look at Nokia, around 2007 or so, had 70–80% of the cell phone share, and they decided to make more of these cell phones, and they were mobile phones that people could use. They're quite small, they're quite convenient, and they just made sure there was less errors, made them cheaper, made them faster. And by 2012, they'd lost 80–90% of their market share. And Aller, the CEO at the time, said, "We did nothing wrong, but we still failed." Why? Because they didn't take into account innovation. By 2012, everyone wanted a smartphone. And that's something, again, if we look at the next iteration, we can go all the way back to Kodak. Again, Kodak had the patent for digital photography, but decided not to exercise it. So again, that wasn't a technical issue, it was a leadership issue. And lastly, I'm just lending itself to innovation. Innovation is something that we're going to have to value. And again, it's the idea that organizations today have to think about from the customer's point of view. And this is a leadership perspective. Now, coming back to how we've actually created content at Skillsoft, and again, this is something that may be important for all learners, and it just doesn't have to be Skillsoft based, but we actually partner with MIT and the McGovern Institute there, and we actually tried to ensure that we did a brain science study with our learners. And what was going to happen is it was either going to validate what we were doing or change what we were doing. So here what you're seeing is actually an Accenture employee. We had about 400 of these. And they're going to be taking an e-learning course. And as they're taking this course with a mouse in their hand, we're mapping with fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, what parts of the brain are being activated. So more parts is good. And then EEG, measure the stimulation. So how high was the stimulus of their brain when they were actually taking these courses? And again, it was either going to validate what we were doing at the point in time, or is it going to change what we're doing? And we found some very, very interesting things, including things like rate of speech. We found that in different parts of geography, and this study was done in North America, and the East is about 110 words per minute, and the West is about 100 words per minute. We found what colors were good. We found out things like, testing, when was testing good? We actually found that scenario-based video, when it comes to learning, especially visual learning and online learning in particular, is better than just the talking head video. Why? Because people needed to be shown what good looks like, not just told what good looks like. There's nothing wrong with being told, because again, you have credibility with experts. It's something that's going to be important. So yeah, when we look at how we're presenting this information to the learner, we also wanted to keep in mind that we want to acknowledge the consumer-based tendencies. So things like Netflix, we know that with Netflix, even changing terminology, they have channels there. So people know what a channel is. They know what sports, they know what romance is, they know what action is. They may not know what a curricula is. So is it easy to just change that? When we think of a playlist, it can be a learning program or a playlist. Playlists are very familiar in Google Play and Apple iTunes and so on. And just the idea of liking something and the efficacy of the offerings. And again, when you think of Amazon, what they found at Amazon is you're 6 times more likely to interact and purchase something in a store if there's at least one review and one negative review than not. Why? Because if it's all positive reviews and no negative reviews, you don't trust it. There has to be some efficacy there. So is there an ability to rate or like or something to that effect within the system or platform that you're working with? You know, softwareadvice.com has indicated that 67% of the issue of anyone trying to engage in some sort of platform is really around this idea of the technology around. And the technology and the way we're learning has to be very convenient. So here, this is from Berzin. Berzin indicated that, you know, only 1% of the typical work week can be allocated to discretionary learning, and that's only 24 minutes. So when you think about those 24 minutes, you know, to half an hour each week, why is that important? Well, work gets in the way. I mean, if you think about how we compartmentalize our work, you know, the formula for the modern learner is something like this: learner-centric, you know, just in time and personalized learning experiences, something that you want to have, because people are used to having things like Facebook. Micro and modular, you know, short bursts, small pieces of content. And YouTube really colored our attention span. In the past, it used to be a sitcom or a TV show that was half an hour. Now, you know, YouTube can actually have videos that are more than 10 minutes long, but in the initial stages, the limit was only 10 minutes, and that kind of colored our expectation of how long media should be. Varied treatments, again, having different scenarios in terms of engaging people, in terms of having the audience. And again, it's not just about when we talk about engagement, it's not do they like it or not. It's is their brain being activated? When we looked at fMRI and EEG, how many parts of the brain are being activated, and how strong is that activation? Retention driven, we think of tests normally at the end of a class, end of a lesson. Tests can happen or something happening at any time. So again, retention driven is there. Embedded, we'll show you what that looks like. We've heard about learning in the flow of work. Wouldn't it be great if, you know, prior to, I had my leadership training, you know, a month ago, and now I have to have my very first critical conversation. Wouldn't it be great on my walk from my office to another person's office, in that 3 minutes, I could watch a video to help remind me of what are the things that I should do to make sure that my feedback is effective. And then mobile access is quite important. And in fact, my hometown in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, they did research with Harvard Medical School in terms of the students there, in terms of how to, you know, what is a modern student like? And they asked them the question, how do you like to look for information initially, and how do you like to consume information? About 53% said they like to look for information on the internet. So again, it goes hand in hand. Web-based technology is a great way to engage people and teach them. But what was interesting is they asked them, how do they like to consume information? 51% said an iPhone. They didn't say something generic like a mobile device or a tablet or anything like that. They actually said an iPhone. So when it comes to consuming, hopefully you have the ability to project on an iPhone and a mobile phone and just make it easy for people to consume. Again, back to their mobile, you know, consumer-based technologies. In fact, I want to say in this, you know, area, of course, in Asia, you know, I'm Filipino, but when we think about the swath of Asia and the access to mobile devices, people spend a lot of time on their mobile devices. So hopefully this is going to be, you know, applicable. Now, in terms of you know, modalities, you know, hopefully you have the ability to have different modalities: watching, reading, listening, and practice. So in the collections that we have, watching, we have courses that actually show what good looks like. We have live events that might be happening. Reading, reading is very, very important, because if you think of certifications, any sort of that deep learning that's happening, having the ability to read actually helps synthesize learning. Listening, in terms of listening, Audible's actually indicated that Gen Y is consuming more books than boomers. It's just in a different format. They're listening to books rather than reading hard books. And then practice, the ability to actually have a ability to use that information in practicing. So when you look at leadership development in terms of the topics, what Skillsoft has done, again, our our initial topics were we came up with them with Wharton School of Business, and we've now partnered with MIT Sloan because they have the same kind of idea with technology and leadership cannot be separated. And these are all modern competencies. When you think of leading with technology, leading with innovation, of course, leading virtually is very, very important today. And we've tried to ensure that we have not just the ability to look at content ad hoc, but we have these things called Aspire journeys. So if you wanted to go from a new manager to a mid-level manager or to a senior leader, again, that's something that can happen. And let's, just perhaps take a look at this really quickly. Just going to go to a browser. So again, really quick look. What if I was in a browser and not on a platform? Wouldn't it be great if I can just highlight a term, then click with a widget in my browser, and then find professionally vetted assets that I can watch, I could read, and I can listen. I can look in this platform that's very Netflix-like. It has these tiles, whether it's here or maybe it's on my mobile device. Mobile device will look very much the same as what I see here. I can start something on my mobile device, resume it here, and vice versa. And again, back to in terms of the content, if I went into leadership program, I can lead myself, lead the business, and leading the team. When we think of leading the team, it may be something like embracing diversity. And what I'd find is all the different types of modalities here. I can watch a course. I can actually see some expert insights where people can tell me what good looks like. I can read different books or summaries of books and MIT Sloan articles. I can listen to these when it's not appropriate to be watching. I could be on a plane, perhaps, or in driving a car or something to that effect. And then lastly, in terms of practicing, I might have templates that I can put my own logo of my organization on to guide me in terms of how am I going to discuss diversity, download a PowerPoint presentation that I can talk to my team and actually deliver it with this discussion guide. And really, when we think of this, all this type of activity can be tracked, and we can see, of course, month to month here, what's happening. And in terms of dashboards, it's convenient from a learning team. At the very, flick of a switch here, I would know exactly how many videos and books and summaries and so on have been looked at. So I'm going to switch back to this presentation again. Now, as we kind of go on to a little bit of the takeaways here, because I want to be able to perhaps get to your questions and help you, if you have queries. A couple of takeaways here. Leadership development, of course, is something that I tried to make the case that it's important for everybody, and especially with the talent that we have today and trying to retain talent. I actually attended a executive digital conference a couple of weeks ago, and people were talking about how do we try to keep the engagement and the morale up of our organizations during this time frame. And this is not going to be any different than when there are fluctuations in the economy, when there are different changes in technology go forward. The pandemic has compounded things and accelerated all sorts of different investments in technology, but uncertainty is something that will continue. The C-suite, when we think of the CEO or the CMO or the CHRO, the C should be about change. And one of the changes that we're looking at is how to address the modern learner. And what I've tried to make the case with today is this parable here. This is actually a burning ship. And if we go back to the 1500s, Cortez sailed from Spain, trying to actually get to India, but ran into North America, ran into Mexico, and ran into the East Coast. His job from a perspective of Spain was trying to establish a new trading fort establishment with a number of ships. And these 7 ships, they landed, and for a number of months, they were supposed to create these forts. After a few months, the forts weren't finished. Cortez asked his captains what was the holdup, what was happening, and they told him we were keeping some of the supplies on the ships just in case we failed. They went to sleep, they woke up, and the story goes that all but one of the ships was burning. And I'm going to make the argument here that when it comes to leadership development or any type of development in terms of learning development, especially online, if it's not as good as Netflix or YouTube and Facebook and so on, these are the things that you're competing with in addition to work. Work gets in the way. Again, we only have 1% of your time. These are the things that are burning your boats. And you need to have a program and the tools that are going to be compelling and going to be engaging for your audience and your learners. Now, when we think of learning and we think of the future, just a message. This is from Gartner's 2019 Digital Dexterity Index. And the way they measure digital dexterity in particular is the ability and desire of a population to want to learn new skills, to want to learn new mindsets, have a growth mindset, have an agile mindset, have a resilient mindset. And the 3 countries that they rated top were, number 1 was India, number 2 was the United Kingdom, and number 3 is the United States. So again, when we think of this period that we've just come out of, or are hopefully coming out of, with this acceptance and really challenge of COVID and the pandemic going forward, we know that hopefully technology can help us be safer. We know that embracing and understanding leadership will help continuity within our organizations, and we hope that we are able to be more successful and more engaging with our organizations. So with that, I want to stop here, and we can perhaps take questions.
Thank you, Benny, for that very insightful and interesting presentation. We now open the floor for the audience questions. So here we go. We have our first question here. So one of the attendees is asking, if leadership development receives so much attention in terms of spends, why is there a leadership risk in most organizations, which obviously leads them to hire a leader from outside the organization?
I apologize. Sorry, it sounded like the bandwidth kind of dropped a moment, and I just missed a piece of the question. Went silent for me for one moment. Could you just repeat the question, please? Thank you.
I'll just repeat. So the question is, if leadership development receives so much attention in terms of spends, why is there a leadership risk in most organizations, which leads them to hire a leader from outside the organization?
Okay. Well, if you follow the logic here, again, Aberdeen Group has indicated that only about 1 out of 3 leaders can be filled from the inside the organization. In many instances, there is a lot of spend happening, but perhaps not a lot of analysis around how effective the organization's leadership development programs are. Again, only about 1 out of every 3 postings in an organization can be filled internally. So there should hopefully be more emphasis on more application-driven leadership development, especially in terms of measuring what that effect is going to be on your culture, what that is going to be in terms of productivity, and what is that going to be in terms of effect of your retention. So just because we're spending lots of money on leadership development, according to Jeffrey Pfeffer from McKinsey, doesn't mean it's very effective. And again, I harken back to the idea that maybe I had leadership development and it was an event, but how do we sustain leadership? Wouldn't it be great if we had something like the help icon on Word or PowerPoint when we need it to have the information in the flow of work when it's needed? So again, it's around sustaining the employee in many instances, post-training, and even getting the training more in terms of how quickly we can get people into this development prior to them having their very first leadership position.
Sure. The next question from the audience is, how can you be certain that your reskilling and upskilling initiatives have been successful?
Reskilling and upskilling initiatives overall, there's a, maybe harkening back to the Vance and Bourne study that we talked about. What was interesting in terms of all the regions that were queried, the highest amount of dissatisfaction was actually from the highest, the areas and the skill sets that were highest, the people that were highest trained, which was interesting. So what was interesting, people didn't know what they didn't know until they got a taste of the education and training that they required. What's really interesting is that from a skills perspective, if you're measuring, there hopefully is number one, an application and alignment to your business strategy. If there are many organizations today, I'll just indicate, that are perhaps undergoing what they believe is a digital transformation, but it's really just an application or implementation of technology. The digital transformation, especially from a leadership perspective, is not just putting in some sort of technology to have some sort of efficiency. It's really around trying to use that technology to drive the culture change and to also drive the organization to whatever they're trying to achieve. So again, efficiency unto itself, does that meet the business goals of the organization, or is it to produce new products? Is it to enable people who were, for example, RPA? There may be tasks that you're automating, and you're finding issues and you're finding different problems, but are you now enabling the people in the organization to solve those problems? Are you enabling the people, if you have data systems that are actually producing data, are the people who are now working the systems able to translate that data, make it into stories, communicate it, and use it for your customers, your clients, and so on? So coming back to how you measure it, it really depends on what development you're talking about, but the idea that it is aligned to your business objectives and not simply to some sort of initiative is going to be important.
Sure. Thank you for your response. The next question is from one of the attendees. They asked that focus should be on the center of interest and accommodations of culture diversity is must. Your thoughts on it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So leadership development is not in and of itself cannot be achieved in a vacuum. There's first of all, diversity and inclusion is something that's going to be important. We know that organizations, according to Mercer, that are more diverse, and we're not just talking about things like sex, we're talking about age, we're talking about cultures and so on. They're more apt to be responsive to a wider swath of the population and are able to be more productive and more profitable. And in terms of Mercer, they've indicated about 26% more profitable. So when we think of diversity creates a couple things. Number one is that swath of perspectives across a spectrum. And second is that when we think of critical tension in organizations and having debate and having different points of view can ultimately create better products and also lead to less friction in the future by identifying potential issues. So that's absolutely something that's important. Moreover, when you think of diversity, I'm just going to refer to maturity and age and the ability of people. When I say maturity, it doesn't necessarily have to be age. It could be someone who's more skilled and less skilled. I think that mentorship and mentoring is going to be very, very important when we're trying to scale, especially in a more geographically dispersed workplace. And these informal and perhaps formal leadership opportunities are a great way to practice as well. So I think all these things that are being mentioned are going to be very important components for those organizations that want to be successful.
Sure. The next question is, how is the digital transformation different for small organizations as compared to large organizations?
How are they? Okay, so well, we know that digital transformation overall, there's lots of examples where digital transformation allows small organizations to compete with large organizations, and large organizations in many instances to be agile like small organizations. You know, the famous examples, of course, are things like Uber, the largest taxi organization initially that didn't own any taxis, or Airbnb, the largest hotel organization that had no hotels, or I'm going to go back a little bit. A few years ago there was a product called WAG, and WAG was a dog walking. They wanted to be the Uber of dog walking, so you can actually on your phone, if you're too busy or not able to take your dog on a walk, you could actually find a dog walker, and because that dog walker also had their mobile phone, you could track and see to make sure they're actually doing the work. And what was interesting there is, they initially were trying to raise about $3 million, and after 2 rounds of funding and a relationship with SoftBank, they actually raised about $300 million. And this was supposed to be just a regional kind of arrangement that was happening in Western North America, but it got quite large. The sad story about that is once the owners got 300 million, they spent about 100 million on new offices, and SoftBank pulled the money back. But that said, the idea here is that with digital transformation, it allowed for decoupling, it allowed for disintermediation. So when we think of decoupling, really simply, many smaller organizations are able to compete because laws and regulations are different today than they were previously, and these technologies enable them to leverage their agility and lack of structure in many instances. Lack of structure has been allowing for more innovation, has been allowing for more, when we say more innovation, more voice from different points and parts of the organization. And now, for example, this is a longer answer, but you think of the idea that I don't have to buy the album or this whole CD anymore. I can buy just different pieces of music, whether it be on streaming or just buy a song. I can disintermediation. I can go right to a supplier, which is where those small companies, the small companies don't have to go to a big distributor, and then the distributors can go to the stores. People can go right to them. So I'm just giving the idea that at the end of it, digital transformation, the implementation of AI, machine learning, robotics, and so on, is enabling in many instances these small organizations to be very, very competitive with these larger organizations.
So very well. So the next question is, what about success of micro-learning? Does it work?
Micro-learning. So micro-learning is going to be really, really important, coming back to Berzin's kind of idea of the 1% of discretionary time. It's the mind share, it's the attention span that we're dealing with, and we're catering to people again that are now very, very used to the applications that they've had, which could be Facebook and Netflix and so on. A person by the name of Jason Dorsey wrote a book called Why Size Your Business, and I believe he talked about the three key things are number one, contextualization, making sure that it is around the person who is consuming, whether they are a learner or whether they're consuming some sort of media or so on. So again, contextualization, whether we have a program and it's curated towards them and their likes and dislikes. And of course, our platform, for example, at Skillsoft is like that. It uses AI in the background to suggest things that you might like, but that is something that people are used to. Second is make it mobile. Of course, we know that people are consuming things in a mobile format, and it has to be something micro when you're consuming in a mobile format. And lastly, Jason also talked about the idea that people, especially Gen Y, they're not. We make the assumption that they're tech savvy. They're actually not tech savvy. They're tech dependent, which means they're looking forward to something that's very familiar. If it's like Netflix, they know how to work it. If it's like YouTube, they know how to work it. And if you go outside those confines, you're going to be confusing them, and it's going to be hard to engage them. So again, YouTube videos and so on are very small. In fact, when we did our own primary research around 2017, I looked at the about 270,000 online completions. And this is before we started really drill down and make these segments quite small. And you could always just consume a 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute, 7-minute, piece of media. But if you look at the length of the overall courses, which were chapters building up, if we looked at courses that were, basically on the way to being an hour long, greater in length and time, versus courses that were around 30 minutes or less. Courses that were 30 minutes or less, the percentage of time that people had opened the course on the first launch and completed in that first launch was about 87%. The courses that were much longer, an hour or more, the completion on the first launch was about 27%. Why? Because work gets in the way. We calendarize our workday in 30-minute segments or less. So again, catering to that and catering to the ability for people to consume in those small snippets is going to be much more what the learner's expecting. And if that's the case, there's a better chance that they will look at it, consume it, and depending on what you're doing to treat that from a media perspective, remember it.
Sure, Benny. So due to time constraint, we won't be able to take up all questions, but this is going to be the last one. It says digital transformation is the key to survival of organizations in future. Do Skillsoft have time-bound and tailor-made programs to develop leaders in this respect?
Oh, absolutely. So two things. Number one, we have again partnered with MIT Sloan for our leadership development program, which includes aspects of a digital leader. In fact, we have a digital leadership assessment that was created by Jerry Kane that I mentioned previously, who is again from the Carroll School of Business, writing for MIT SMR. We wanted to partner up with a progressive organization, and our courses, in fact, we have blockchain enabled certificates. So as people complete these, there's some efficacy that they know the skill, they know the information, and that blockchain certificate can actually be displayed on your LinkedIn profile or displayed to your employer and also with an organization can help with talent management, who has these pieces. But absolutely, we have almost 90,000 books in our library. We have thousands of videos, thousands of courses, but it's our job to curate them for the learners. And we have found that over the last 20 years, there's about, we've actually done over 50,000 custom mappings for organizations over the last 20 years. And over those 20 years, we found there's 500 very common things that people are looking for: project management, Six Sigma, leadership development, presentation skills. So we've looked and curated the best of the best, and we can take those curated pieces and customize them for organizations to make sure that these channels that the people are seeing, and organizations can actually do this themselves within our interface, is very pertinent and very contextualized for that organization and for the learner. So yes, absolutely.
Sure. Thank you, Benny. I'm sure the audience will have a lot of practical insights to take back from there. Any final thoughts before we close this?
Yeah, I wanted to actually showcase one little piece here, and it's just it's a bonus. There's a book out there. It's called Return on Courage, which is another way of talking about return on leadership. And again, we talked about this idea of it's by Berman, that technology is important, but I want to say that leadership is just as important. If you would have spent $1,000 10 years ago in each one of these companies, this is how much it would be worth. This was at the beginning of this year prior to the pandemic, so this is around December. Apple 4,600, Amazon 6,000, Tesla, Netflix. Who would have thought Domino's, a pizza place, would be on top? And what's interesting there is they actually told their customers, we're not a pizza company or a food company. We realize that our food isn't actually that good. We're an entertainment company. We made sure our pizza is convenient, and the leadership to say that and to take technology to make sure that people could get their pizza, their food, as quickly as possible in an entertaining fashion with a web app and so on was very effective. And in fact, more effective if you would have put in $1,000 over the last 10 years. It's actually worth more than Netflix, Tesla, Amazon, and Apple. So I want to stop there and want to thank everyone for their time today.